Hello, my name is Elizabeth Pham, and for my virtual learning lesson today, I will be teaching you guys how to create latte art. All right, so we'll be covering 4 essential topics for today. These include the steam wand placement, the actual process of steaming the milk, the importance of the milk texture that you get from the steaming process, and executing the pour, which creates the latte art. What you'll need to create successful latte art are 3 essential items. You'll need a milk pitcher, needs to be thoroughly rinsed. It can be rounded or pointed tip. It doesn't really matter for beginners what type of tip your pitcher has. The second thing you'll need is a steam wand. This will be typically attached to the espresso machine that you'll be working with. At the cafe I work at, True, it has the Slayer espresso machine has a Panarello wand attached to it. And the third thing that you need is your milk of choice. This needs to be cold and untouched just so you can steam from scratch. And what I recommend as a barista is steaming with dairy to begin with, just because it's the easiest to steam and the easiest to pour. All right, so starting off with the steam wand placement. Once you pour your milk into your pitcher, what you're going to want to do with the steam wand is directly insert it into the center of the pitcher, just so the tip is right under the surface of the milk. And once you have it right there, you're going to move it to either the left or the right of the pitcher, about half of an inch from the wall. And the reasoning for this position is because it creates this whirlpool. It allows this whirlpool vortex within the milk when you start steaming to create like the creamy texture of the milk that you need to actually pour and create latte art. So once your steam wand is in position, you're ready to start actually steaming and talk about the milk steaming process. So in order to achieve your latte art to look like this, like with the silky finish that these have and the nice contrast between the milk and the espresso, you're going to want to focus on 2 essential things. You're going to want to look for the amount of aeration, which is the act of adding air into something, in our case milk, which then creates like a froth, and the temperature that you have. So once you start steaming, you're going to want to keep it in your position that we just talked about. And you're going to want, once you start the machine, you're going to listen for initial like hissing or paper tearing sounds. Once you hear that initial sound, you can move your pitcher a little bit further up. And once you'll keep steaming, and you're going to keep that position, just moving the pitcher, not the steam wand, to create this froth. Depending on the type of drink you're making, you can add a lot of froth or a little bit of froth, but we'll be talking about that later. And then as you continue to create that froth, you're gonna feel for a type of temperature. So once it's about too hot to touch is where we gauge, I would stop steaming. All right, and putting this all together should look a little something like this. So you see her position, and you hear the hissing sounds. Right. And there are 2 errors that a barista can run into when steaming a milk. And the first one includes adding too much air and creating too much aeration, which would look a little bit like this. Here's the pitcher too far down, and it's adding too much air, which you can see creates a lot of foam, and the milk is not hot enough, and it's a little too foamy to pour, which you'll see later on. All right. The second mistake is not adding enough air. But before I start this video, I want to let you guys know, just because I don't want to talk over the sound. Luckily, when you don't add enough air into your milk when you're steaming it, the steam wand itself will be aggravated, and it'll make really loud hissing sounds, which you'll hear later on. So once you hear those sounds, immediately you're going to want to lower your pitcher a little bit more just to add air. But when you don't add enough air, this is what it should sound like. So that's what it sounds like when you don't add enough air. And the reason why we talk about the amount of air you need to add into your milk is because the type of texture you get from the steaming process is really important to creating like a really nice, like successful like latte art. So what we saw earlier, when you added too much air into milk, we saw that there was too much foam and that it's not warm enough. This is what a pour would look like if you tried to pour with extremely aerated milk. As you can see from the beginning, the foam immediately muddles and mixes with the espresso, not creating like a nice clean canvas, and the pour is just too thick and it's not really enjoyable to drink. And on the same side, or on the other hand, pouring with barely aerated milk looks a little something like this. If your milk is too thin when you start pouring, it won't lay on the canvas like so, and it'll continue to move around, which creates like an unpleasant image. And that's not what we want to get for our latte art. In order to check that you have well steamed milk, I would put the pitcher onto your counter and swirl and look for a wet paint consistency. Once it coats the walls like this, like so, not too thin, not too thick, you can tell that it's good milk that you'll be ready to actually pour from. So once you have milk that's perfectly steamed, you're ready to actually start pouring. Hold on one moment. Okay. All right, so we're ready to actually start executing the pour. All right, so what you're gonna wanna do when you start pouring your milk is start from a very high stream, like so. So when you pour from a very high stream like this, the milk is able to go underneath the first layer of espresso, which is called the crema, because we don't want to use all of this milk to actually create the latte art and you need it to fill the majority of the cup. We're going to want to pour from a high stream so it fills it up while leaving the canvas blank, so the rest of the milk that's foamy and creamy can lay nicely on top. All right, and the next step after that is starting right here. So what you're going to want to do is tilt your cup as much as you can without actually spilling the espresso, and reaching and putting the pitcher about in the center of the circle. And you're going to, not the circle, the center of the espresso in your cup. And you're going to want to pour as close as you can to the pitcher while moving the pitcher, like pushing the pitcher to the back of the cup, which creates like the first base, which you'll see. This is not the best example because this is not creating a nice contrast, but the second one will show up a little bit better. So you're going to want to repeat that motion and pour from the center and push while simultaneously tilting the cup so you don't spill the liquids inside. You're going to keep on pushing, and then on the last push, the last like pour, when your cup is just about full, you're going to want to lift your pitcher up and create that small stream that we saw in the beginning and cut through. So that creates like the heart, and it creates all of the nice rings within the latte art, like so. All right. And then once you hone that skill of creating this nice simple pour, like what this is called is a tulip, you can create other fancy pours like Adriana does in this video here. She creates
kind of bad. Okay.
All right, and now that you have all of the tools and all of the basic knowledge in terms of the steam on placement, how to steam milk properly, and how to look out for the type of textures you want, as well as like the basics in terms of pouring, you should be able to pour. And that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, I have my email displayed here. I have my phone number attached as well. And if you'd like to look at any of my latte art from the past or how to pour other latte art, I have my Instagram loaded here. And I would also like to say thank you to SlidesGo for the slide template that I got this from. But thank you.